You're listening to Fulfilling Career, Happy Life, the podcast for accomplished professionals who want to identify what's next in their career, then make it happen without compromising what matters most. I'm your host, Randi Roberts, an executive and career life coach, and I'm glad you're here. If you want to feel more energized about your work again, this show is for you. So let's get into it.
Welcome to Fulfilling Career, Happy Life. I am so excited to have my guest with me today. Vicky Bradley is the founder and CEO of Women in Leadership Empowered, which is a name that I just love the name of your company. I know it's also the name of your podcast and your initiatives. Vicky has not too different a background than mine, lots of deep experience in the executive space. As well as being a certified executive coach with really deep experience helping women identify their leadership strengths. And I'm so excited to have Vicky here with me today. In particular, what we want to dive into is something that she works very, very deeply in, which is conscious leadership. And so we're going to go ahead and dive in. So Vicky, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Okay, so let's start at the top. Let's start with if you want to explain a little bit about what you do with conscious leadership, that's great. But really what I want to do is define what you mean by conscious leadership.
Sure. Well, let's start with that. So my way of defining conscious leadership is, as leaders, we have so many priorities coming at us all the time. And it's very easy to get caught into those knee-jerk reactions, making quick decisions for short-term gain, not thinking long-term, and guilty, right? My own career, I spent many, many years running a number of organizations. And because everything's going so fast, it's hard to slow the train down in order to be able to consciously respond. And so the way I look at conscious leadership is that shift from being highly reactionary to having choice. And that choice then enables you to respond in a way that is appropriate for those conditions, situations, even individuals that you're encountering at that time. So that's how I work with it, Randi. I spend a lot of time with leaders also because what I find is we spend a lot of time in our head.
Oh, yeah.
And when we become super conscious, we can actually have more harmony between head and heart, and trusting that intuitiveness that actually can guide us, in making decisions that are better for the long term and for the greater good.
I love so much about what you said, and there is so much similarity in the work that we do. So I'm really excited. I have a feeling we're going to be in violent agreement in everything we talk about.
Probably.
This concept of reacting versus choosing our action is something that has always really fascinated me. It's always been something that I've been aware of, but how do we know how this is acting on us?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I mean, there's two energies that I work with when it comes to conscious leadership. So there's catabolic energy and anabolic energy. For the audience, catabolic energy is when we're in high stress. We might be lethargic in how we're approaching. We might live in fear, self-doubt, or even anger and frustration. And when a leader is in a high catabolic state, you can get short-term results, but it's not sustainable. But the stress that your body is encountering can only take so much. And so eventually your body has a lot of dis-ease and can eventually turn into disease. So I'll just share a quick story with you. As I was sharing with you, I spent 30 years in corporate executive roles. and my body started talking and I wasn't paying attention, and I was in high stress environments. I'm traveling all over North America and some in Europe, but I'm on this constant, go, high stress, demands are higher and higher. And my body started giving me signals that I wasn't paying attention to. And, it started in my low back. And then eventually this turned into a full-blown autoimmune disease, which was debilitating. And it took me physically not being able to get out of bed before I actually started to listen. So that stress, that being conscious, like I heard it, I saw it happening, but I was in complete denial. I didn't want to admit that, oh my God, Superwoman here was breaking down, right? And then that anabolic is when we're in our flow state and our best self. We spend more time here in that prefrontal cortex. So we're making good decisions. We're more creative. We create environments that are engaging. And so you can even look at your workforce as a signal. Like, are people calling in sick? Are people missing? Are they coming in late? Projects aren't getting done. If that's the case in your environment, that you're operating more in that catabolic state versus an anabolic state. And so it's, how do you start to make those shifts? How do you start to recognize? And that's where the choice actually comes in.
It's, I'm like, my mind is blown right now because you and I have not talked about this, but I could tell that story. I was 30 years in the corporate world. I had lupus and for many years. And when the stress got to be a lot and the travel and just wearing down, and I had to admit, the way I thought about it was I was Superwoman. I used to define myself as, I have this high-powered, successful career. I have a family. I, have community involvement. I do all these things, and I've never had to take a day off. For some reason, that was like part of my self-definition. And when that broke and I had to actually admit I was in the hospital, it caused me to really take a look at things in that way. It's amazing how you and I have the same story.
Well, and what you just said there, Randi, it's like we were wearing this badge of honor, right? Oh, I'm not taking sick days. Like, oh no, because that shows I'm weak and, I can't do that. And especially as women, I think we fall into this trap because we have to work twice as hard to compete with our male counterparts, especially in those executive leadership roles. And that is a myth, by the way. So it's, recognizing that, and then how do you start to shift? Personally, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Even as hard as it was, and as much as I went through, and as much in the beginning I felt like I had lost, and I'd love to hear your perspective on that, but it was actually the best thing in the world that ever happened to me because it led me to where I am today and being more in alignment with who I am and what my purpose is on this planet, right? Like, so I think that's an important one. Like the signals are there if we listen, if we pay attention. And sometimes we need a coach. I've had several coaches that have helped me to connect those dots so that I could be the best version of me.
Yeah. It's really funny the impact your story is having on me because mine is so similar. And it just, we talk about the impact of stories, and it's not until one really hits you that you're reminded of how important it is for people to see those real life examples of these things. I feel the same way as you. The struggles that I've been through and the realization of the choices that I've had to make, which are not easy.
Yeah.
Have really served me well and absolutely made me a better coach. I don't know. I mean, I feel like the analogy of a moth, no, I guess a caterpillar goes into their cocoon, and when they're ready to burst out, they have to work really hard to get out of the cocoon. And the process of that work strengthens their wings enough that they can fly. So if they didn't do the work, they wouldn't be able to fly, and they'd probably get eaten by a bird or whatever. That's the way I think about the struggles that I went through, is the process that I needed to go through to come out this other side and be able to help so many other people.
Yeah, that's a beautiful analogy that you just shared. Very visual, right? And oftentimes we get caught up in thinking of which is back to the conscious leadership. We often think, oh my gosh, I'm a victim to this.
Right.
But you actually have a choice. And, yes, you do have to have those moments because it's a reality. Like your world has completely changed. But then it's how do you start to shift perspective? How do you choose? Because me, any of us in our audience that have gone through a health struggle like this, we can choose to roll over and not participate in the world, or we can choose to carry on. And then how do we want to carry on? And that's really what conscious leadership is about. You get to choose. It's not right or wrong which choice you make. It's what works for you. And so that conscious leadership then becomes very much a part of who you are, and embodying and knowing deep down that you have a choice as to how you want to play in this world.
And just knowing we have a choice can relieve some of that stress.
Yeah.
I have similar conversations with a lot of clients because I do some core energy coaching as well. And one of the things that I find is really helpful and sometimes is eye-opening for people if they're very impacted by that catabolic energy, which we all are at times. So they're feeling, sort of self-focused and all the things that, keep us playing small. It's helpful a lot of times to recognize that that is just our nervous system reacting to stress. It's that fight or flight or freeze response that we get, from the caveman times and a grizzly bear was chasing us. Somehow that depersonalizes a little bit. It's not anyone's fault that this happens. This happens to all of us because we're mammals.
Sure. It's natural. It's normal. What is important from a consciousness perspective is how long are you staying there? Right? Because if you stay in that state, so if I use mine in your example, you had lupus, I have a different type of autoimmune disease. Once we were able to move out of that catabolic state, we were actually able to start choosing things that were more supportive of us and that helped us move to that more anabolic, fulfilled life that we're meant to live, right? We're not meant to be in high stress states for long periods of time. Yes, that short period, that adrenaline you need to run from that bear or that tiger, absolutely. But that needs to be a very short period of time. And so recognizing how long am I staying in that? And it's perspective shifting, right? Like, I mean, I'll get into an example later, just to help people understand how you can take one situation, but you can have 7 different choices as to how you want to look at that particular situation.
Yeah. Well, why don't we get into that now? I'd love for you to share that example.
Okay. So one of the ways that I work with clients, there's 7 different energy levels. And I'll just give a brief example. Like I happen to live in Toronto, Canada, where traffic is not your friend. You spend a lot of time commuting. But I'll take the example of commuting in rush hour traffic. So Randi, you and I are meeting this morning. We're meeting in person instead of online. And I'm en route to meet you. And all of a sudden somebody veers into my lane. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't handle this today. I'm on my way to meet Randi. We have this important podcast that we're doing because we want to share with people conscious leadership. So I go into this, why me? Why did he pick me? There were thousands of cars on the road. A second way that I might look at that is more from a level 2 energy, which is I pull up beside of him. I have a few choice words. I might have a few hand gestures. Right? Because I'm angry and I'm pissed off that this guy or person has run me off the road. Level 3 energy, it might sound like this. Wow, you know what? Maybe I ran into his lane because I was really engrossed in that podcast. And this is my time. I have quiet time on the way to work where I get to educate myself and I get to hear great podcasts that are going on. So I take responsibility, but I also rationalize it a little bit, right? Because maybe I went into him. Level 4 might sound like, oh my gosh, I hope that guy's okay. You know what? His wife could be in the back seat having a baby, or maybe he's had an emergency at school and he's off to get his kids. So I'm coming more from that place of concern for him or her. Level 5 could potentially sound like, you know what? I'm going to carve out a couple of hours during my week where I don't have any distractions, and I'm going to spend that time completely focused on the podcast. It's not just a, kind of a fleet of the moment. I'm actually focusing on it. And by the way, when did that skyscraper go up? I didn't even see that. And so we're starting to look at what are the opportunities and what are we missing because we have our heads down and we're not paying attention, we're not present. Level 6 could potentially sound like, you know what, I don't even need to be in rush hour traffic because I'm going to invent a flying car and I'm going to be at Randy's in 10 minutes and we're going to get to sit and have a coffee before we get started in all of this. And, people think, oh, Vicky, and no, but it's being a visionary. It's seeing beyond what is in front of us today. And then level 7 is recognizing there is no problem. There's no solution. There's no winning, no losing. It just is, right? And so if you take that example, I took one example of traveling in rush hour traffic, but I gave you 7 possibilities or 7 choices of how you might show up to engage in that specific situation. So that's conscious leadership, right? No good or bad, no right or wrong. It's completely your choice as to how you want to engage in the world on that situation.
Right. That's a great example. Thank you for explaining that. Okay, so let's say I'm in that traffic, and something happens to, create stress. Somebody pulls into my lane or whatever. So that catabolic energy is going to show up for me, and I'm going to have that sort of self-protective moment or that moment of anger, maybe more than a moment. How can I shift myself? You say it's a choice, but how do I make that choice if my automatic response is catabolic?
Yeah. Well, it is hard when it's your automatic, when that is your default.
Yeah.
No question. And it takes practice. It's like going to the gym, Randy. So, you know what? I want to have these big biceps. I can't go to the gym and work out one time and get big biceps. I've got to be able to go regularly, consistently, and consciously build those muscles. And so, it's more about having less of those catabolic moments and more of an anabolic moment. And part of the way we do that is take a pause, right? Like we are so fast to react. So catch yourself. Okay. Oh, so I got angry about that. Is that how I really want to be? It's, 7:00 in the morning. Do I want to walk in the office or meet with this client and already be angry? No, that's not what I want to do. So you consciously start to shift how you want to show up. And it takes practice, right? It's a discipline. And oftentimes I'll have clients say to me, oh, well, Vicky, this happened at work and you don't understand. And I'm like, I do actually, because I've spent so many years in these environments, but I will get my clients to sit back and actually write out the response for each of those levels. So if, your boss walks in and he says, Randy, that project that you delivered on was substandard. I'm not really happy. I think you missed a lot of things. Well, what are you going to do? First thing you're going to do is go, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. All these stories start happening in your head, right?
Sure.
So either you don't respond or you might be, I did the best I could. You're going to react. And so you want to then be conscious about how you respond. So thank you, Vicky, for coming in and sharing with me. So can you be more specific? Tell me what didn't work for you, right? Because that helps you to be better as an employee. It also helps that leader be a better communicator.
And just specific. That taking those steps, leaning into curiosity so you can understand it, shifts you up into an anabolic space.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's really helpful. When I have this conversation with clients, sometimes, I practice this and it gets really easy with practice, but like you said, any muscle you have to flex in the beginning. I had a couple of clients that sort of had trouble. Wait a minute, how do I make this shift? Like they were really attached to the anger, I'm right and you're wrong feeling. And one of the things we talked about was that even levels 1 and 2, the catabolic energies, really serve a purpose to protect you. And so it's almost like one of the first thoughts, take a deep breath, give yourself that pause, as you said, and then thank the levels for showing up and trying to protect you, but you don't need to be protected. You got this. And somehow that changes the shift. This is going to double click on it. It's an anabolic shift to an anabolic space rather than a catabolic shift to an anabolic space, which is just harder. You've got an anchor on you when you're trying to make that shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, as we were just talking about, it takes awareness, right? It takes discipline to start to even recognize, right? And don't beat yourself up. If you go, oh my gosh, you know what? I didn't show up the way I wanted at that time. That's okay, right? Because there are going to be moments. And again, it's not right or wrong, because to your point, level 1 and level 2, that catabolic energy is a protective mechanism. You just don't want to stay there for a long time. So if that becomes your nature, your default all the time, know what the consequence is. You are going to run into issues, whether it's, you can't connect with people properly, whether it's, people see you as, fearful. They don't want to interact with you because you're angry all the time. But use it when it's necessary to use it, and then move on to something that serves in a bigger way.
So thinking about that, if you, we talked about the example of the traffic, right? So that's something that we're reacting to, and we're having to shift up most of the time out of catabolic energy, at least for a moment. But let's take an example of you're going to, you're giving a talk, or you're meeting with a client, or whatever it is. How do you show up at the level you want to? What practices do you have for showing up with the level of energy that you want to?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I can share an example of that happened not too long ago with a client. So she had called me and she said, oh, Vicky, I have been outplaced, right? And she said, but I have to meet with the leader that terminated me. And she said, and he calls me all the time wanting to know how to do my job. And she goes, I'm really resentful because they've terminated me. And it wasn't, they didn't terminate her out of performance. It was a reorg that the organization had done. Anyway,
it doesn't feel any different to her, though.
It doesn't, right? And this guy was the messenger, so to speak. Anyway, we spent some time really working on, how do you want to show up? What is your outcome? What is your objective of this meeting? And she said to me, well, I need him to sign this piece of paper. And I said, okay. And she had set the stage. She said, we're meeting in a neutral space for lunch, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, that's great. So there's nobody walking in his office. There's nobody pulling at him. So you've got neutral territory. But how do you want to show up? And she said, well, I'm over my resentment. She said, but this guy always talks over me to get what he wants. And I said, okay, normal. So when he starts doing that, how do you want to respond, not react? And so we had to work through this. And she said, well, my objective, I just want to get the paper signed. I said, okay. So then as you are having this conversation with him, and he starts talking about, I need you to tell me this, I need to know where this is, I need to know that, just pause him and just say, that's all great, we'll get to that. But the objective of our meeting is X. Once we've completed that, then we can move into this. And she was like, oh my gosh. And the opportunity in that, Randi, was that she was learning how to express her voice. She was learning how to take control of a situation that was a win-win for both her and for him. And she didn't begrudge him asking her questions on where things were. So it took practice, though. We practiced several sessions on how to energetically set herself up so that it could be a win. And now she's flourishing. She's doing amazing, actually got a promotion where she's at. So again, it's about, how do you want to be? Not what do you want to do? It's how do you want to be? And how does that impact energetically the entire situation?
Yeah. It's a great example, because there's so many levels to that. She was developing a new muscle in terms of using her voice, and that had to serve her well going forward. she probably also got to work through some of the feelings that she had about the situation in the process. So, that's so great. And then showed up differently in her new place because she freed herself up from that. That's wonderful. We don't get to know the benefits of these painful situations until we're through them.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, it's growing pains, right?
Yeah.
And you got to test, and that's why earlier I said, don't beat yourself up. And sometimes clients will say to me, oh, you know what? I went into this level 1 energy. I showed up with catabolic, and I'm so disappointed in myself. And I'm like, okay. But what did you learn? How will you show up differently next time? What is most important to you? Maybe that was what you needed to do in that situation. That's okay, right? So don't beat yourself up. What I try to acknowledge here is celebrate that you caught it, right? That awareness is growing and expanding as to how do you want to show up? How do you want to be as a leader? And to me, that's the important part. It's recognizing it, having that self-leadership to show up better and different in the future.
Yeah. It's just really powerful stuff. And one of the things that I love about it, you said something before I think was really important, which is it's not just about what you're doing. It's about who you're being in that situation. And we are not just being that person in our leadership role in our work. We are that person wherever we are a person.
Exactly.
The benefits just are exponential.
Yes. I drive my son crazy because I will often say to him, wherever you go, there you are. And he's like, what? But that's exactly what you just said, right? Like, it's not just when you're in a leadership role, because you're always being who you are, whether it's in your community, with your family, at the schools that you participate, like, it's who you are. And so checking that, how do you want to show up? What legacy do you want to leave on the world?
Yeah.
Leave it better than you found it. I mean, that's kind of my motto, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a great place for us to wrap it up. I think we've given folks a lot to think about. I'm so glad to have had you here. Where can people find you if they want to hear more from you?
Yes, absolutely. So LinkedIn, Instagram, Well Empowered, or Vicky Bradley. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can email me if you have questions. It's vicky@wellempowered.com. Randi was also a guest on my podcast, which is Women in Leadership Talk. Great content, amazing women like Randi coming on and sharing their stories and how they're making an impact on the world. So those are all different ways that you can connect with me. We offer a free leadership quiz on our website. If you're curious about how you show up as a leader, there's no obligation, but it gives you some insight as to, where some gaps might be and also where you're excelling.
That's great. I'll make sure that the links to contact you as well as to the free leadership quiz are in the show notes for folks who may want to access that. Great.
Awesome.
Vicky, thank you again. It's just been a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful for you giving us the time.
Well, Randi, thank you for having me on the show, and I enjoy it as well. This is, my passion. This is what I love talking about. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Fulfilling Career, Happy Life. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, follow, rate, and review. Do all the things to show your support for this podcast. It helps other professionals who want to feel more energized about their work again find us. And if you want to take this thinking further, please follow me on LinkedIn, where I share content on a regular basis. You can also get on my email list by downloading the Career Satisfaction Assessment or through my website. All these links are in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. I truly appreciate that you make the time for yourself to listen to the show. See you next week.